How's everybody doing tonight? Yeah? I want to welcome everybody to our 7th edition of Prizm Art Fair. If you don't know what Prizm is one of the premier African and African diaspora contemporary art fairs, not just in Miami, but in the world. And I'm very happy that all of you have decided to spend the early part of Miami Art Week with us this evening. I want to begin the evening by thanking an innumerable amount of sponsors and supporters who have been with us throughout the course of our evolution. We have the Green Family Foundation, who has been a major supporter. Kimberly Green, Dr. Stephen Green, and Dorothea Green have been supporters of Prizm Art Fair since our 2014 edition. The Knight Foundation, we have the Miami-Dade Department of Cultural Affairs, Copper Door, Royal Air Maroc, Miami-Dade or Miami Downtown DDA, Merrill Lynch, who is a new part of the Prizm family, the Miami Bayside Foundation, and of course the beautiful venue that we're in today is the Alfred I. DuPont building. It is a beautiful gem and a part of Miami's history, so we're very lucky to be here in this space today. And I also want to thank Diageo for the lovely drinks that you are sipping on this evening. The Copper Door is providing the delicious victuals that you're munching on. And I want to also welcome the Lightship Capital team to Prizm, to the Prizm family. They've actually been a part of us for quite some time as supporters. And Lightship is a fantastic venture fund that supports minority businesses. And so I want Brian Burkeen to come up and talk about what they're doing with businesses, not just in Miami, but beyond.
Thank you. So I remember 8 or so years ago when we met, it was through one of our programs, Knew Me. You came in and I have this idea about how art should be shown. And from that idea, here we are now, all these years later. So it's a testament to your work and your leadership and how great you are. So clap it up for Gail. Just 20 seconds on us. As mentioned, we're Lightship Capital. We're a venture capital fund focused on women and minorities. We believe in investments in Black art and also investments in Black businesses. So please support your local Black business. Our latest investments are here with us today, so if you guys would stand or wave. We invest $125,000 into early stage startups so they can become the future of tomorrow. So please support Black business and Black capital funds. Thanks.
And now that we have thanked the many supporters that Prizm does have, I want to continue the programming tonight with 2 special women who have been such an inspiration to me, have been supporters to the growth of Prizm in so many ways, both marketing-wise, both venture-wise, and they're both incredible women. Bahia Ramos is the Director of Arts at the Wallace Foundation. She also was a huge part of Miami's landscape as the Director of Arts at the Knight Foundation. And then also Tiana Webb Evans, who is the founder of ESP Group, and she does arts marketing and PR for a number of very important artists who perform in our cultural space. So without further ado, they're going to have a conversation about why they love the arts and why you should love the arts.
Hello, hello. Oh, this is loud. First and foremost, I think, I'll sit down. We should thank Mikhail for her vision. 7 years of vision and tenacity and love, you know. So what was interesting when Mikhail called, you know, I was really like, are you kidding? Why me? I'm a behind the scenes person. She said, well, sometimes people need to shine a light on the puppet masters. So I was like, okay, that's an interesting way to kind of look at things. And then to share a stage with my sister and partner in crime. What most of you may not know, obviously there's many art worlds, but inhabiting a space, I would say a majority space, a lot of the times you have to have support. You have to have a tribe. Until very recently, the tribe was very, very clandestine. But more recently, we've been outed. So it's such a pleasure to be outed by Mikhail. We honor you. So one of the things before we get started in our conversation, it was appropriate that there was gospel music playing. When you think about the role of the arts in secular society, and as we sort of pull away from the idea of religion, there's some things that we do at church per se that are very important. So before we get started, I want to take you guys through 2 quick exercises. If you could humor me and trust me a little bit, and stand up and greet your neighbor and look them in the eye. And just like they say at church, don't leave your row, but give a hug, give a smile, acknowledge someone, look in their eyes. See? Look at that. And just like Pastor would say, let's come back to the come back here, everybody. All right? Doesn't that feel good? Okay, so now that we shared the love on the outside, let's take a little bit of time to cultivate love on the inside, right? So if everyone could quiet down just a minute and trust me again and close your eyes. If everyone can close their eyes that's participating in this. And just silence your minds and your hearts. And if you could please breathe with me. So take 2 deep breaths going in and 4 deep breaths going out. 2 deep breaths going in. 1, 2, 3, 4. One more time. 2 deep breaths going in. 1, 2, 3, 4. Create a space for acceptance. Create a space for non-judgment. Create a space for openness and creativity. Create a space for love. And I just want to thank you all. You can open your eyes for participating, for those of you who did. So we're supposed to talk about, and I say supposed to because I've been known to go rogue, talk about building community. And just to tell you a little bit about what I do, I have a communications and strategy agency called ESP Group, and I work with art fairs and galleries and institutions, as well as hospitality spaces and hotels on defining their voice. I've been in this industry for 20 years and was a communications director of Phillips Auction House. It was a lonely time. As well as worked with a number of people in sort of the blue chip market space. So inherently, I'm a market person. And it's really wonderful to share the stage with Bahia, who is on the nonprofit side. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you do?
Sure. So as a director of arts, I've worked in the private philanthropic space for over a decade, have basically been a steward of other people's money out into communities focused in the arts, whether they be artists, creative people in communities or arts institutions. And the focus has been anything from building community to building audiences, which we'll talk about, and trying to create a certain level of intimacy between this thing we called culture and the arts and everyday people.
So with that in mind, I'd like to get a sense of our audience. How many people are in the arts in the audience? Gallerists? A nonprofit sector? And artists. Wonderful. You know, when I was talking to Mikhail, she was talking about, and we can evolve this into things that are more practical, but I want to talk about an impractical matter. The place of love in practice. It's interesting right now, there's so much conversation about who owns Black art. I don't know if you guys saw that article today. What's happening in terms of, you know, culture and cultural production, who owns the production, who are the stewards of production. And it's so easy to see the work cycle out of our communities before most people even see it. And I was meditating on that, and I was thinking about how does love play into that? You know, it's such a loaded and emotional word. I was reading sort of bell hooks all about love recently, rereading that, and looking at the idea of this amorphous word that makes people uncomfortable. Sitting with the idea of why does it make you uncomfortable? What in it is disruptive, and I think if we are looking at that as action, that will create a framework to plan for building audience. So I think, Bahia, I just want to ask you, in terms of, because like I said, I'm a market person, so I can talk a little bit about that, but in terms of funding the arts, what have you seen in your sort of, as a grant maker, or grantor, the relationship between the dispersal of funds and connection and intimacy, which is part of the love space, right, in that process?
God. Yeah, no, it's okay. I'm like, way to ask a loaded question. So I think that the philanthropic space has gotten it wrong for a long time. We've been acting on behalf of a certain kind of a person who long ago amassed a lot of wealth, and on behalf of their love for community said, oh, I want this to be right and to be true, right? After they have maybe perhaps plundered said community to amass said wealth. But anyway, that's besides the point. But I think that we look at institutions and try to create solutions in our head out of this love to make things right, this need to build a solution. And without a certain level of intimacy with the communities and the institutions and the things the spaces we're trying to build, it falls flat. You know, we rely on research and data, and there's a certain kind of like gut feeling that love needs, a certain vulnerability of not being able to get things right that I think we're just starting to learn about. And so I'm in a space where we work with data all the time. We are a data-driven organization, and we rely on a lot of market research and data tools to help our grantees make better decisions and build some kind of technical relationship with communities they want connection with. But the connection never manifests long-term because they haven't given themselves up to those communities. They haven't professed that vulnerability. They haven't created that softness and that connection that really love needs in order to grow and to be able to flourish.
So talk about connection a little bit from a market standpoint. You know, I talk a lot about the fact that, you know, we're in our 40s. It's fine. I'm gonna be 45. It's okay, everyone. But the thing is that when you look at the Black arts movement, when you look at education within the African American community from the standpoint of people who are 60 to 90 years old, part of the education process, part of being a human, part of being cultured, had to do with supporting the arts. We already had a market. There's a narrative right now that's saying there is no market. We're the great Black art dealers, where we had a market. And when I go into the homes of elders, my mother-in-law was part of the Black arts movement. They have Beardens, they have Catlets, they have Aaron Douglas, they have on and on and on. The works are there. So the thing is that we always get trapped in the idea of recording and we are oral tradition people. So there isn't this active cataloging of our collecting history. The first person who taught me to curate and hang shows was Corinne Jennings from Kenkeleba Gallery and Joe Overstreet. They collected massive amount of real estate downtown Manhattan. They had 2 art galleries. They have everyone from Howardina Pindell on. They curated collections for Oprah and Bill Cosby, and there is this tradition. What happened, then there was this art fair in New York, right? The Black Art Fair and at the Puck Building, and we all congregated from all over the world, and we went there. But guess what? As people started to sort of retire, as the aesthetic language changed and opened up, and my generation, and those a little bit older than me, we got distracted. We got distracted with assimilation, we got distracted with more cars, we got distracted with our corporate jobs, we got distracted. So if I had $1 for every person, I live in a very unique community in New Jersey. And if I had $1 for everyone who told me they did not collect because they were afraid of collecting. I mean, you're talking about people with degrees from Harvard Law School that are afraid of collecting. You start to think, well, what happened here, right? And I think about the idea of this aspiration for assimilation, this disconnection with love of self, this idea that as part of the process and the indoctrination into corporate culture, you might have lost a couple pieces of self that would connect you to this process. I mean, art is our humanity, art is our gift, art is our God and our creativity. And I think just now, you know, you have a fighter in Mikhail, but just now, there's this conversation about a responsibility we have, and that responsibility happens to be love of self. You know, how can you not support the reflection of you and the reflection of your time? If you can have 17 pairs of $2,500 shoes, you might want to invest in the culture of your time. But I think there's a disconnect with that idea of art as a reflection of self.
Well, I think of it in the context of building like lasting generational wealth and what our cultural legacy might be. I'm obsessed with this idea of legacy now because I think about what, generations before me, what they collected, what are the artifacts that tell the world who they were, who I am as a result. And my mother collected art, not in a traditional sense. My mom saw something, usually I grew up in New York, and she would see someone making art on the street, and she would say, oh, I like that, and she'd kind of negotiate the price, or she'd travel somewhere and say, I want that mask, and there's always negotiating the price. But there was stuff everywhere, right? There was art everywhere, and she valued it, and for her that was a signal of kind of a representation of who she was in the world and her place in the world. And I think about what that legacy might be for me as I learn the tools of the trade. And like, I was telling Mikhail, I came to Miami, I bought art now, I don't know, 13, 15 years ago. My first big piece. My smaller pieces were I'd go to a museum show and see a poster of the show that I really liked, and I framed it and I put it up on my wall, and that for me was art. And I bought my first big piece about 15 years ago, and I came to Miami, and it was in Miami that I got access to this world called art, this art world, and I learned how to go and speak to artists, and it's in conversation with artists that I found value within myself and wanted, I started from a place of consumption and have somehow landed in a place of connection. And so it's not about like amassing as much as I possibly can because I love it so much, but really just understanding the connection and the conversation that's being had between all the pieces. So what do we see here at Prizm in terms of a conversation between all the work? All I see is like the power, the strength, the legacy of our culture, of our community, and the expansion of our imaginations that can't be regulated by these like massive forces that drive for assimilation. It's beyond that control now. And I think this fair in particular represents how we extend beyond the limits of our own imagination to create new worlds for ourselves and for each other. And that's critically important in this time. And I think that is the kind of generational legacy and wealth that we can continue on and continue to build for each other.
So in speaking about wealth, I think, I was thinking about this on the way over here, and I was thinking about it is very easy for us to talk about creating space. I think there's, knowing, the first time I met Mikhail, we talked about her degree in architecture. And creating space is a powerful freedom move. But one of the things I know that when we tend to talk about work, African work, diasporic work, we tend to have this conversation about supporting the artist, and I find a lot of pushback with the collectors about value. So I want to talk about value a little bit in relationship to building audience. The idea of value is something that escapes a lot of people. Why is that work $113 million? You have people walk into a space, I could create that, my kid can create that. Like, why is it that way? Let's talk about that for a second. Now, we can talk about the regular art market, right? But we can also talk about disruption, in the sense that we don't necessarily have to do it that way, okay? But you have people that are part of this process. So what the artists are at the core, the conversation with museums, the conversation with collectors. If you're, hopefully one day, Bahia and I, we have mirrored art collections. That's a secret that not a lot of people know. One day, hopefully our collections will be of massive value, I hope. But the only way that happens is if we're all participating in the conversation. So in the sense of you have an artist, and let's say they went to said school, very traditional model, you know, did they go to one of the top 5 art schools? Did they get a degree from a prestigious MFA program, right? So you have these 2 very easily checked boxes. Obviously, they're outliers. Then you look at what are the curatorial conversations around these artists? Who are the curators? They're at museums. How do they get in the museums? Well, who's on the board of directors? Who's buying the work in the museums? Are we part of that value conversation? Because I know if I buy one work and I give another work to a museum, there's added value. So building audiences is important, not in only the sense of having a lot of people like the work, because you can have, with this disruption of social media, an artist who has 200,000 followers because the work is aesthetically pleasing, but that doesn't necessarily mean the work is going to enter the canon of art history, right? So what is the fight that we have as collectors? Our job is to enter the work in the canon of art history. What gets in, what doesn't? Have you done something no one's ever done before as an artist? Is this a conversation that transforms our dialogue and the time? You know, so when you're thinking about audiences and market, we want work that represents a moment in history. But when you're thinking about collections and astronomical prices, and there's some hacks in that, and I can tell you where the bones are buried, but that's for another conversation. It's really about this 2-pronged thing, right? So supporting the artist, but supporting the matrix in which value is created, and having a say in that value is extremely important. And building, and that's why the audience is important. So from my point of view, the clients I worked with, they want to enter their artists into the canon of art history. That's the job, right? So my role in that is becoming a strategic partner to do that work. But in terms of your work, Bahia, how does that, as far as the artist and that track, how does that work?
Well, there are 2 things. I mean, I think one, from an institutional level, everyone sees, one of the problems I see is that everybody wants our culture, our presence. Our bodies are undervalued in the market while our art is trying to be of value, right? And so I think when people are trying to build audiences, the automatic leap is like, okay, where are the people of color? Where can I go to find more people of color here? But when they think about our communities, they're not thinking about the dollars we can leverage, the power of the art, the high quality. They're just thinking about kind of bodies and space. And they have to start thinking about the actual value that we're leveraging. So that's one thing that I think about around value. And I think for art, I was like, I never ask those questions when I'm buying art. The question I ask is, does it move me? Because I think intrinsically, as creative people, we know whether something's flowing or not. Like, we don't need to ask all those things. And when something moves me, that has value to me. And so, you know, I almost never, I'm almost maybe to my detriment, don't get into the technical aspects of what moves me in order to justify its value.
You mentioned something about data and audiences and institutions, and we have our dear friend Stephanie, that's a partner, of Museum Hue, who does real work in this space in terms of audience development. But there was something that you said about data in terms of like foundational work and institutional work. And Toni Morrison in Source of Self-Regard talks about data as violence. Data is a commodification of bodies.
You know, data to me is abhorrently boring because it's historical. I'm interested in creating and cycling into the future and doing something new. But at the same time, I think once you end up in a data conversation, there's a soullessness about the data. There's a checked box that I think people are buying into because they're saying data is gold. And it's sort of this flattening of a human experience, it's a flattening of the dynamism that creates real connection. I think we're in a space, to be, you know, even more technical about this, we're in a space where aesthetic beauty is easily sought. There's no reason why a website shouldn't be beautiful. There isn't any reason why your publication should not be slick and appealing. You can do it all online. So then, since the competition is so high, how do you cut through the competition? And that truly is about spirit and space and creativity. And that's the magic. And how do you build an audience with authenticity and a point of view? What is your point of view and what are you trying to do? People don't stop long enough to vision and articulate who are you trying to reach and what exactly are you trying to do? Not necessarily from the artist, from a gallery standpoint, through the institution. It's really important to understand what is the goal. And once you understand the goal, what is your value add? How are you bringing something new and interesting and dynamic to the table? And if you're not doing that work, you're going to find this road very, very difficult. I do want to kind of wrap because I do know that we have to continue the evening and continue the party, but I just wanted to see if anyone had any pressing questions. Otherwise, we will turn the mic back over to Mikhail. Do you want to say? No, I'm good. Mikhail, thank you for having us. I hope that we've provided some food for thought. Have a great fair.